That is the big question. And essentially, we are just an upright, walking, big brain, super intelligent ape. This could be us. We belong to the family called the Hominidae. We are the species called Homo sapiens sapiens. And it's important to remember that, and in terms of our place in the world today and our future on planet Earth. We are one species of about 5,500 mammalian species that exist on planet Earth today. And that's just a tiny fraction of all species that have ever lived on the planet in past times. We're one species out of approximately, well, let's say at least 16 upright walking apes that have existed over the past 6 to 8 million years. But as far as we know, we're the only upright walking ape that exists on planet Earth today, except for the bonobos. And it's important to remember that because the bonobos are so human and they share 99% of their genes with us. And we share our origins with a handful of the living great apes. It's important to remember that we evolved. Now, I know that's a dirty word for some people, but we evolved from common ancestors with the gorillas, the chimpanzee, and also the bonobos. We have a common past and we have a common future. And it is important to remember that all of these great apes have come on as long and as an interesting evolutionary journey as we ourselves have today. So it is absolutely surprising that we know as much as we do know today about our ancestors, because it's incredibly difficult, A, for these things to be preserved, and secondly, for them to have been brought back up to the surface. And we really have only spent 50 years looking for these remains and begin to actually piece together our evolutionary story. So let's go to Lake Turkana, which is one such lake basin in the very north of our country, Kenya. And if you look north here, there's a big river that flows into the lake that's been carrying sediment and preserving the remains of the animals that lived there. Fossil sites run up and down both lengths of that lake basin, which represents some 20,000 square miles. That's a huge job that we've got on our hands. 2 million years ago, at Lake Turkana, Homo erectus, one of our human ancestors, actually lived in this region. You can see some of the major fossil sites that we've been working in the north, but essentially 2 million years ago, Homo erectus, up in the far right corner, lived alongside 3 other species of human ancestor. And here is a skull of a Homo erectus, which I've just pulled off the shelf there. But it is not to say that being a single species on planet Earth is the norm. In fact, if you go back in time, it is the norm that there are multiple species of hominids or of human ancestors that coexist at any one time. Where did these things come from? That's what we're still trying to find answers to. And it is important to realize that there is diversity in all different species, and our ancestors are no exception. There's some reconstructions of some of the fossils that have been found from Lake Turkana. But I was very lucky to have been brought up in Kenya, essentially accompanying my parents to Lake Turkana in search of human remains. And we were able to dig up, when we got old enough, fossils such as this slender-snouted crocodile. And we dug up giant tortoises and elephants and things like that. But when I was 12, as I was in this picture, a very exciting expedition was in place on the west side when they found, essentially, the skeleton of this Homo erectus. I could relate to this Homo erectus skeleton very well because I was the same age that he was when he died. And I imagined him to be tall, dark-skinned. His brothers certainly were able to run long distances chasing prey, probably sweating heavily as they did so. He was very able to use stones effectively as tools. And this individual himself, this one that I'm holding up here, actually had a bad back. He'd probably had an injury as a child. He had a scoliosis, and therefore must have been looked after quite carefully by other female and probably much smaller members of his family group to have got to where he did in life, age 12. Unfortunately for him, he fell into a swamp and couldn't get out. Essentially, his bones were rapidly buried and beautifully preserved, and he remained there until 1.6 million years later, when this very famous fossil hunter, Kamoya Kimeu, walked along a small hillside and found that small piece of his skull lying on the surface amongst the pebbles, recognized it as being hominid. It's actually this little piece up here on the top. Well, an excavation was begun immediately, and more little bits of skull started to be extracted from the sediment. And what was so fun about it was the skull pieces got closer and closer to the roots of the tree. And fairly recently, the tree had grown up, but it had found that the skull had captured nice water in the hillside, and so it had decided to grow its roots in and around this, holding it in place and preventing it from washing away down slope. We began to find limb bones, we found finger bones, the bones of the pelvis, vertebrae, ribs, collarbones, things that had never ever been seen before in Homo erectus. It was truly exciting. He had a body very similar to our own, and he was on the threshold of becoming human.